All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Keeping the Beat, hosted by the Tennessee Music Education Association, partnered by the CMA Foundation and the UT Martin Music Department. The series Keeping the Beat, hosted by TME members and educators everywhere, virtually by offering invaluable information from music industry professionals. Be sure to tune in Monday through Thursday, 8 p.m. Central Time. I want to encourage you to engage during this live video stream by commenting with your questions and comments, and I will respond to you throughout the session with the help of my lovely wife, Whitney. One disclaimer, while this is a live stream, it will be remaining on the Keeping the Beat by TNMEA Facebook page, the Tennessee Music Education Association's Facebook page, UT Martin Music Department's Facebook page, and the Keeping the Beat YouTube channel for future reference. As such, your comments will also remain as part of the archive, so no shenanigans. A little about me. My name is Michael Holland. I'm the Assistant Band Director at Nolensville High School in Nolensville, Tennessee, which is part of the Williamson County School District. I am husband to Whitney and father to Kinley, Beckham, and Easton. I have my bachelor's in music education from MTSU in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and my master's of music in music education from Anderson University in Anderson, South Carolina. And I am currently working toward my EDD in educational leadership from Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a percussionist. This is my 12th year teaching. It's my 8th year as a band director. I spent my first 4 years working with Franklin High School and area middle schools, and then 6 years with Grassland Middle School and Franklin High School combined, and the past 2 years at Nolensville High School. When I reached out to Dr. Julie Hill about presenting to UT Martin's music department due to the COVID-19 pandemic, she asked that I keep my presentation broadly focused on music education to make it meaningful for all music department students engaged in online learning. So that is how I structured this presentation. However, I hope all of you watching will gain something from this session. In my planning, I tried to think of what I wish I knew going into the education field and what advice I've been given along the way. So that brings us to the topic, From the Trenches, the Practice of Teaching Music. So in this presentation, it kind of starts in a macro big picture, talking about the 5 steps of effective leadership. And then we'll break it into more of a micro view, looking at the vision, different procedures, goals, rehearsal structure, and questioning, and then also some be informed, be involved, and be professional tips, as well as some words of wisdom that I've received along my career. So to get us started, we've got some interaction time. So I would love for you to comment in the video, in the live stream, what are characteristics of effective leaders? How do they act? What do they do? What draws you to them? Add your comments to the live stream. I'm going to move on in the presentation and then we'll bounce back to this soon. So the 5 steps for effective leadership, this actually comes from Mike Schmoker's book, Focus. And the first step that he presents is called research. And he says in the book, even if we differ on best practices, it is critical that we make decisions on the basis of good evidence rather than popular appeal. And this was something that stood out to me a lot. Things that I've heard a lot in my career is, that's how it's always been done. Maybe that's how I was taught. Or maybe that's what so-and-so does. But we have to know the why behind what we do. For example, like I teach band, and so I have to know why I teach breathing exercises and why it's so important to do breathing exercises daily with my students. I have to know why I teach scales to my students as well. And so as I'm developing the content for the students to go through, I have to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and it needs to be founded in the research that I've done and conducted. Many young teachers I've found try to recreate their experience for their students because it's what worked for them. Sometimes I see people try to pull out a piece that maybe they played when they were in college or maybe in high school, but it doesn't really fit their ensemble needs. And so I highly encourage you to think about why you're choosing the works that you're choosing, and make sure that you're choosing it for the right reasons. So the first step for effective leadership is research. The second one that Schmoker presents is called reduce. Stephen Covey wrote a book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and his third habit says first things first. And as band directors or music educators, we have to know what's more important first. And we have to do the right things first. Someone once told me, master teachers teach the right things the most effective and most efficient way at the right time. When I was working at Franklin there, we often referred to this as triage. If someone came into the ER and they had multiple injuries, we always tried to diagnose what was the thing that was going to cause them the most harm. We don't want to focus on their broken wrist whenever they have internal bleeding, right? And so with our ensembles, we also have to focus on what is the thing that we need to focus on most. It's not always the rhythmic and pitch accuracy. Maybe we need to focus in on tone before we start getting into the more challenging rhythms that they might face in their content. And so we have to put first things first. We also have to focus on less projects at a time in order for us to be able to do more. One book that I've read was Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. And his second baby step, he calls the debt snowball, where you list all of your debts from smallest to largest, and you start just knocking them out from the smallest one all the way down as far as you can each month until you get out of debt. And whenever I go to make a project list, I always try to get some momentum going, because like we know, we've seen all the cartoons, the snow starts at the top and then it gradually rolls to where it's this huge snowball at the bottom of the mountain. And once we get some momentum kind of behind us, then it starts helping us check off more projects at a time. I've also found I'm a planner, and I'm often an over planner. And so everything that I end up trying to do usually takes longer than I expect for it to take. So I really encourage you, don't cram too much into a given time frame, and make sure that you're planning ahead. One thing that I know for me, I still get caught in the trap of, this requires more steps than I realized, and now I don't have enough time to complete the task with the timeline that I have. And so I always try to start planning ahead, weeks or months out, depending on how big the project is, to make sure that I get everything in. Schmoker says, to succeed, leaders must carefully select, severely limit, and then persistently clarify the work to be done for those they lead. And those that we lead, they may be our students, but for a lot of us, it could also be the parents that we're leading. It could also be trying to gain influence and favor with our administration. And so we have to make sure that our message is staying on point, that we have thought about it and we know how to properly communicate that to maybe our administrators, to our parent base, or to our students in the broad level, or maybe just in the specific like class to class level. The third step for effective leadership is clarify. It should always be easy for your students to identify the goal and what is expected of them to achieve that goal. We have to make sure that we're aligning our expectations. A lot of times I find that the reason why we're not meeting our goals is because we're not on the same page. All the paddles for the ship aren't going the same direction. And so we have to make sure everyone is aligned, that we all focus our energy on the same target, and we're aligned on what our expectations are. Maybe that's for a rehearsal, a single rehearsal. Maybe it's for the week or the month, or maybe it's the piece that we picked. We got to make sure we're clarifying and aligning expectations with all that are involved. Another part of this is to be patient. Sometimes it just takes time. It takes repetition and it takes patience. I use the analogy of a farmer all the time with my students. And even though they might not see the plant sprouting through the soil, it's still working very hard and growing deep, strong roots as long as we're watering it daily. And so we have to clarify our expectations, and then we have to be patient as our students are slowly getting it. Schmoker says, clarifying the priorities is the single most important job. and leaders must explain, illustrate, and advocate for what matters most. The fourth step Schmoker lists is practice, and frankly, we just don't spend enough time in repeated practice. If you don't do it in class, then they won't do it at home. This was something that someone told me years ago, and it's kind of stuck with me. For a lot of us as music educators, we were the ones in our band programs or our orchestra or choir programs that were really excited to be there. We were highly motivated, but all of the students we have in our rooms might not have that same level of motivation. And they might not think about their ensembles and getting better and practicing unless they're getting ready for their class that day. And so if you don't do something in class, then don't expect for it to improve. Make sure that you're constantly reinforcing the areas that need the most focus and practice. Another thing I try to teach with my students is the concept of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is basically taking something, focusing a lot on that detail, and making sure that you're growing in those areas, whatever it is. Set goals, be specific. A lot of times I find that when students say that they practice, that just means they got their instrument out and they played through their concert music. Maybe not getting better at the notes and rhythms that they struggle with, but at least they play through it. We have to teach them what deliberate practice really means. Repeated mastery-based practice must be the norm, according to Schmoker. And the last of the 5 steps for effective leadership is to monitor. Consistent observation of student performance and the review of data is so important for teachers. We have to monitor what the students are doing, and that has 2 steps to it. Number 1, we're constantly evaluating student performance. But number 2, and this one often gets overlooked, is evaluating our own instruction. Sometimes the reason kids aren't getting it is because they need more time to process and they need more time for their muscles to build. But sometimes it's because of our instructional strategy, and we have to find out what works best for each student. It's also an opportunity to complement student effort and growth. When we're monitoring students, maybe it's while they're playing and we hear something that's good, we need to find those opportunities to complement what we want to see repeated. Monitoring should capture and celebrate progress and increased consistency, according to Schmoker. And so those 5 steps are to research, to reduce, and clarify, to practice, and to monitor. And so now we're back to our interaction. What are characteristics of effective leaders? How do they act, and what do they do? So if you are just joining us, you can add your comment to the live stream. I'm going to check in with Whitney and see what we've got so far.
Yeah, so you guys came up with some really great qualities of effective leaders. Some of the consistent ones throughout the feed were that effective leaders serve and they're in the trenches with the people that work with them. They're modeling productivity and they're passionate about what they do, and so they're bringing those people alongside of them. A lot of you talked about leaders being goal-oriented and being able to clearly communicate those goals so that everybody can help kind of push toward that vision.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Having leaders that are in the trenches with the students, with the parents, and with maybe their additional staff, that is such a way to build buy-in, to build their trust. And so that's incredible feedback. All right, moving on. The next step we have here is implement your vision. Going back to Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about beginning with the end in mind. And so something that we have to think about as educators is, what do we want our program to be like in the future? Sometimes the future for us is just the next week. And sometimes the future for us is 5 and 10 years down the road. And whenever you're really crafting this vision statement, what you want your program to be like in the future, I encourage you to think 5 to 10 years down the road. And as you're thinking about that, think about what will it take for you to get there and for your program to get there. That would be the mission statement. So your vision talks about what you want it to look like, and your mission talks about how you get there. And those are going to define the kinds of acts that you have to do while you're in the process of reaching your vision. I had the great opportunity to get to know David Vandewalker, who's a band director now, retired. He was a district fine arts professional in Georgia. And he asks these questions all the time. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? And these three questions are so crucial as we start developing and implementing our vision. It kind of goes back and relates to Schmoker's 5 steps of effective leaders. We have to consistently monitor where we are, and we have to do our research to discover where we are, and then we got to figure out where we want to be, and then define and clarify for all of our stakeholders how we get there. And so some examples that he provided in one of the sessions I got to attend, he said, where are we? Maybe it's that our students do not seem to value the band experience, and he was a band director. And then he said, where do we want to be? He said, students value band and stay involved in practice. And how do we get there? We engage the students on a personal level and provide more engaging lessons throughout the year. So as you implement your vision, I want you to think now about who are your role models. Maybe they're people. What are the people that have been role models for you? And maybe it's in the education field. Maybe it's a real great teacher that you had. Maybe it's your band director. Maybe it's in your family or someone else that really stood out to you. But think about your role models. Maybe it's a program. Who are the model programs that you're modeling what you're doing after? And then think about what attracts you to these role models. So maybe for those people, are they certain character traits? Maybe their leadership skills, their humility, or their courage. Maybe it's their trustworthiness. Maybe for the programs, it's the qualities that they have. Maybe it's the way the program consistently sounds, their ensemble sound. Maybe it's the kind of offerings that they have. It might be their professionalism whenever you see them out in public or on the stage performing. Or maybe it's just the level of excellence that they consistently achieve. So think about who your role models are. And if you feel comfortable, go ahead and share them in the comments section. Moving on, this next section gets heavily into the micro. And it talks about procedures, goals, and rehearsal structure and questioning. So the first step is understanding the procedure. For our students, procedures are so important. How the exercise goes, what the chunk is, and what are the instructions. Those kinds of procedures getting in place, getting the students to think about it, maybe offering feedback is so important. Another thing is, maybe you just need to think about how they enter and exit the class. I've been in some highly structured band rooms where the students enter, get their instruments out of their cases, and they go sit down and start their warm-up. I've been in other band classes where the kids trickle in, some of them wild and crazy, and some of them kind of just taking their time. And so as you're developing these procedures, you have to practice them, establish them, and get the students in the habit of how to enter and exit your class. Maybe it's how you start rehearsal every day. Do you set a timer? Do you go out and just stand on the podium and wait? Or does it start at random time intervals depending on when the students are finally ready? And then how do they carry their instrument? This is something that I know as a middle school band director I talked a lot about. And it was a big deal to help those students understand how they were supposed to carry their instrument. Other things that you need to think about is establishing goals. Provide specific goals before playing an exercise. 1 or 2 goals maximum is what I try to stick with. And I also try to mix between ensemble goals and individual goals. So for example, like whenever I'm doing a warm-up, a lot of times in the few counts in between, I'll jump into like subdivide every count. Or maybe consistent volume throughout, or make the notes sound the same. Just simple, quick phrases can really help align the students behind the expectations that you have and help them understand what you're hearing, so that then they start to listen for it and they start to have the same goals that you do. Another thing is thinking about the different categories that goals can fall under, not just ensemble or individual, but also the musical performance categories that we find in our rubric. So there are sound quality goals. Maybe it's talking about their tone and how they can improve it. Maybe it's technical accuracy. Maybe it's their pitch or their rhythm accuracy. Or it could be musicality. Maybe they're not crescendoing or performing at the correct dynamic level. But there is nothing more important than tone. In my experience, I used to find myself in the weeds. Someone told me it's hard for you to see the forest for the trees. And I would get so focused on some notes and rhythms that I would lose track of, do my kids sound good when they play? And so we have to make sure that our priority is always aligned on tone. The next one is rehearsal structure. We have to rehearse like they are never going to practice individually. It kind of goes back to, if you don't do it in class, they won't do it at home. And in part of our rehearsal structure, we have to make sure that they are thinking about the right things, that they're approaching it with the right mindset. And so engagement is key. In a band room, for me, sometimes whenever I can get caught up in the details, and sometimes I look up and I see their eyes are kind of glazed over, and that's when I know I have to change it up. I know that I have to get those kids involved and engaged again, because then we're just doing mindless reps that aren't helping anybody. As long as they're engaged, then they're going to continue to improve. And one big thing is demand excellence of your students. I, at times, was really uncomfortable helping my students figure out if they were developing a good sound or not. And largely because when you have a whole classroom of students, you don't want to single out a single kid. However, there are times whenever, in my experience, people move on too quickly and they don't establish the level of expectation clear enough for the students for them to go home and feel the need to practice to reach that level. A great band director told me once, we must define what mastery and excellence are at the most basic levels in order to grasp more difficult concepts later. And this really starts early in the school year. And the more that you can establish a level of mastery and excellence, the more that the students are going to start achieving that when it gets harder later. So this is a rough outline of a typical rehearsal for me. Again, I'm a band director, and so I always start out with breathing just to get their lungs warmed up. I try to do a little bit of singing every day, and part of that I'll build in buzzing for the brasses. We always play concert F, and then that might lead into some long tones like Remington, or doing some lip slurs and Chickowitz. I try to do some articulations. That was one thing, especially early on. For me as a percussionist, articulations were more challenging for me to teach my students. And so I had a lot of help from David Vanderwalker's clinic and from my mentor, David Adelit, to help understand how to shape the air. And so I reinforce that with my students continually. We do rhythm sheets, or we sight read. We play through scales. I always try to play a chorale. And then we'll tune sometimes as a group or individually, and then we'll jump into some concert literature. And so that seems like a lot of fundamentals packed in there, but that's one thing great band director Richard Saucedo always talked about, is he would spend about half of his rehearsal on fundamentals. And notice there's a lot of things on that list, but it helps keep the process moving forward while also still reinforcing some of the things that they need. It's kind of their daily diet of things that they have to have. And again, if you don't do it in class, then they won't do it at home. And you won't see the improvement and growth that you want. The next thing is questioning. So I always throw some questions up on the slides whenever I'm teaching to get the kids thinking of the right thing. So the first thing has to do with where am I going? What are the instructions? And then where am I going to breathe? This applies for like not just at the beginning before the rep, but also it gets them thinking about what is the musical phrase? How long do I have to be able to pace my airstream out? How do I want to sound? This is something I think that gets our students more tuned to the sound that they're trying to achieve instead of just the sound that happened to happen whenever they made a sound. How loud do I want to play? I know for me, I have some very excited students that want to play loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. And so I always ask those students, how loud do you want to play? And we always talk about that balancing and playing in their trios. And then I try to challenge the students to think about what is just one thing that I want to accomplish this rep. Because especially for someone like me and maybe other music educators, we always thought about all of the things we wanted to fix, and we were very aware of all the things we wanted to fix. But we also had good processes to fix those multiple things each rep. But for some students, they just need to have one goal. Like just set a goal and see if they can achieve that goal and check in with them. Maybe ask them and do some spot check. What is that one thing you were doing? And then after you're done, ask them, hey, was that better? Did you improve in it? And so asking these essential questions, getting the kids thinking and engaged, really helps in the process. So I see our comment feed blowing up, and so I'm gonna kick it back over actually to Julie and Alexis. I know you guys are watching, and thank you guys for all that you've done and for inviting me to be in this. So I want to jump it to you guys and let you make some comments there in the comments section. And we're going to scan through as well and try to find some that have stood out, some mentors and things.
Yeah, so it sounds like you guys all have had really influential teachers and mentors in your life. And they have done some incredible things to shape you and how you now teach your students. I don't know, do you want me to share out some names that I've been seeing on here?
Yeah, go for it.
So Dr. Drew Davison and Jim Holcomb have been mentioned. Terry Jolly, which I'm not even in the music field, and I know who that is. And then we've got Nancy Matheson and Jim Campbell, some great role models. And kind of the thing that people keep saying throughout this feed is that these role models and mentors were humble and they were willing to make mistakes and grow and learn. And Julie talked about, having this collaborative group of teachers that are all learning together and helping each other grow. So that's a really beautiful thing. One comment that I thought was especially great was Chelsea Tinsler Jones said, "Tone includes percussion. Demand that your percussionists make quality, beautiful sounds."
Oh,
so,
preach.
I knew you would like that.
Preach. Now you're speaking my language. It's funny, I heard someone say once, like, why is tone on the percussion solo and ensemble sheet? And so it was a learning opportunity for them and for me, a teaching opportunity for me. Tone is so important, and it definitely includes percussion. I'm scrolling through here too. I see, Terry Jolly. I was fortunate to get to student teach with Terry and Philip at Siegel Middle School while Alexis was there, and it was incredible. It was life-changing. I also saw, I think Julie put Nancy Matheson. I was blessed. I grew up in West Tennessee, and I got to go to the UT Martin Honor Band all the time. And I will never forget meeting Nancy and getting to learn from her in that process. It was incredible. And Jim Campbell at University of Kentucky, he is a pillar in the education field. And so, yes, definitely some great role models out there. All right, let's jump back over to the presentation. So, the next section, we're talking about be informed, be involved, and be professional. So this first one here, be informed. Again, be informed of the best practices. We have to know what other people are doing and why. So it goes back to that effective leadership steps from Schmoker. Do the research and know why you're doing what you're doing, and what it will do to help your students. And don't just know the best practices for just maybe your instrument or your area of expertise, but know the best practices for dealing with different learning styles. When you're in music education, you're going to be faced with a lot of challenges, a lot of students that have all sorts of different things that are going on with them. And we have to learn as educators, not just how to teach that's comfortable for us, but to teach in a way that makes it comfortable for the student. And so we have to learn these best practices. So I tend to start by looking at like, who are the successful programs and what are they doing to be successful? As you're looking into that, you also need to evaluate what about their situation is different than yours. If you are in a small band in a rural area and you are the only music teacher in the building that teaches choir and band and orchestra, then you might not have the same bandwidth as a program that has 4 dedicated band directors in their program at a high school level. And so we have to be realistic about who we're looking up and holding up as our model for our program. But we can also still learn from those programs that are different in different settings than us. Also, we've been name dropping some people here with these role models, but we have to know who the best educators are in our field and kind of know their background, like what made them one of the best in our field. Who are the names that you should know? I told my percussion students once, just go down the list of like innovative percussion website or a Vic Firth percussion website and just look at the name of their signature artist and then Google them and look at their bios and see like what are they known for? What got them to where their name gets to be on a stick? And I think the same thing is true for like, learn who the conductors are of your favorite orchestras and learn who the principal players are that are playing those solos that you love listening to. Know who the names of the people in your field are. And then another kind of component of being informed is knowing how you will be assessed. We typically have rubrics, and like in marching band, we have marching band judge rubrics that we're judged on. And one that I pulled here for us is the Tennessee Music Educator Association's CPA rubric. And we have to know how we're going to be assessed and what our students need to know. So here's that rubric. I know it's kind of small print. The rubric's on the right, but it breaks down into these 4 main categories: sound quality, technical accuracy, musicality, and professionalism. And then you can see within those, there are some big points underneath. And if you notice, those first 3, sound quality, technical accuracy, and musicality, also like call back to the goals that we set for our students whenever we're doing reps and our procedures. And so sound quality, again, tone is the most important thing, and keep the main thing the main thing. We have to focus on tone quality, and not just the ensemble tone quality, but individual tone quality. Balance and blend, that goes back to one of those essential questions. How loud do you want to play? Pitch and intonation, are we playing in tune? And do our students know what to do if they sound out of tune? Technical accuracy. This is the part that I tend to gravitate to most. And it is, this is only, listening to a judge's tape when we were at Franklin, and we thought for sure they were going to comment on this thing that we put all of this effort and energy on. And then they wound up talking about one student's tone, and it just really kind of hit us, and then back to tone. But then the last one, musicality, unfortunately is also one that gets neglected. What should the interpretation be like? And whenever I think of interpretation, I listen to a lot of recordings of the pieces that we're doing, and I provide recordings to my students. But something that I've learned over time is I try to provide multiple recordings so that they hear multiple interpretations. because that's the awesome thing about music. There's not one right way. And whenever we're teaching our students to interpret music, we have to help them learn how to interpret music. And some of that is going to be through guiding them, and band, we have a very particular style that is just characteristic to us, march style. And we have to teach our students what march style is. But we can't get so caught up in trying to match the recording of the Dallas Wind Symphony, whenever that might not be the only interpretation that's out there. So have your interpretation, know why it's your interpretation, and then help your students align behind that interpretation so that they can execute it well. And then musicianship. I always tell the students, take the opportunity to be more musical. And whenever you can, do something with the musical phrase. Music is always going somewhere, or it's coming from somewhere, but it's never stagnant. I tell my students, stagnant music is like a still watered pond that gets all the disease and moss and the grossness in it. It stinks. And so music has to have some life in it. It's got to move. It's got to flow. The next one is be involved. I cannot stress the importance of being involved in music education associations, also known as MEAs. Don't just take opportunities that they give you. Maybe that's, your regional honor ensembles, or like the Tennessee State Convention that we all get to go to. Try to get plugged in and contribute, join a committee, get engaged with the people that are on the executive boards in each of those associations, and try to find opportunities to get plugged in. A lot of times as band directors, especially as young band directors, we kind of keep our head down and we wind up sticking in our own program. And whenever we look up, we realize there are a lot of helping hands out there that we just aren't taking advantage of. So get plugged into your music education associations. Kind of related to that, make connections, build relationships. Being a teacher, a lot of times, and this is honestly an area I struggle with from time to time, I get so caught up in what I have to do, and I forget about the connection that I'm supposed to be building with the other teachers that are in the building, or maybe with my administration, or it could be my parents that are supporting our program and sacrificing all of their time off to take our students on a trip. We have to maximize our opportunities to build relationships with the people that are helping our program get down the road, and to build relationships with the people that, quite frankly, have been around more and know more than us. No one is expecting us as teachers to know everything. Even though we are the professionals, we're still practicing the art of teaching. Our finger on the pulse of what's happening in our own program and in music education in general. So be involved. Next point, be professional. I can't remember if I heard this in a college class, and I hesitated putting it on here, but don't touch the kids. This is something that, especially in our day and time, I cannot count how many times there is a cell phone that's out. And I saw one kid, they had their phone in their shirt pocket, and they were recording me the whole time. And for no other reason, just because they thought it was funny. But, we are constantly under the microscope. And this is something that you shouldn't have to say, but apparently we do have to say it, because there are, unfortunately, people in our profession that cross the line. The second tip, don't touch the money. That doesn't mean that you can't take a payment from a kid for their solo and ensemble fees or whatever it is, but make sure that you have the checks and balances around you, and that you're not putting yourself in a position for some parent to call you on mishandling money, or for the books not to be in order. Make sure you're taking care of what you're supposed to take care of. Speaking of, know the policies and procedures for your district and for your school. There are so many areas and things that they don't tell you about in music teacher school in college. And a lot of it is what happens in the straight up policies and procedures that your district has. And believe me, they have it for everything. There are policies about how you're supposed to deal with travel, signing up for travel within a specific timeline. There are policies about how you go about purchasing equipment and instruments and things that you need for your building and your room. There are policies about fundraising, when you can and can't do things and who has to approve it and all of the things that go into making a fundraiser. There are policies in place for hiring staff and clinicians to bring in and for contractors. And so we have to know the policies and procedures and make sure that we're dealing with those things at the right time. And then again, back to the professional piece, submit your stuff in on time. Whenever there's a registration deadline for maybe concert performance assessment, get that thing done and send it in. And then whenever the payment deadline is up, get it done and send it in. This is something that unfortunately a lot of creatives struggle with, is the structure of registering and paying the dues. And whenever it comes time to submit a form, we are notorious as teachers for not doing the work that we've been assigned. We don't always do our homework. And so we have to be professional. And what I think is so important for us to understand is to know that this isn't just a reflection of us, our individuals. This is also a reflection of the program, of the students that it represents and their parents, and of the school and your administrators, and of the district. And so whenever you have a program that continually submits things late or has frequent changes or doesn't pay the bill on time, then it starts to become a negative mark for your program. So this next one is some of that interaction time. I want you to think about words of wisdom that you've received in your career, or maybe over the years that you've been studying to play and all of the things. I'm going to share some of mine, and then we'll sift through this and go through words of wisdom from you all in the comments. So this first one stood out to me. I was at a session and at the Music for All Summer Symposium, and one of the older seasoned band directors said, "Don't hide and don't be afraid to be found out." And I tell you, this was like a dagger to my heart. As a young director, I was always insecure about the things I didn't know, especially for me as a percussionist. Being a band director, there are so many more people with wind instruments than percussion instruments, and so it was hard for me to really know and confess what I didn't know how to do. There's so much that I don't know personally, and I also had to learn that it's not something to be afraid of. And honestly, like, someone will find out that you're not very good at something. And honestly, they probably already know that you're struggling, and they want to help. They want to help you know how to improve in that area, and they want to help your students get better. So don't hide, and don't try to hide your weaknesses. Try to, and you don't want to brag about your weaknesses, but try to put them out there to people that you believe in, people that believe in you, and seek help from those that can offer it, from people that you respect, from those role models. Because it's not about trying to hide the things that you don't know. It's about being a learner for life. Back to it. Music is a lifelong journey. Change happens, so be open. All of us, I think, have experienced at least one or two shifts in music popularity. And, especially now in the age of social media and streaming music, my students, there's a song that's hot for like a week, and then a week later, if I played that in class, they would look at me with judgment. And so things change fast in this business, and we have to make sure that we're staying on top of those changes. Your goals in year one are not going to be the same goals, and they shouldn't be the same goals in year three, because you are learning more, your program is evolving and changing, and you have to evolve and change with it. In the same regard, music compositions are constantly changing. New people are coming out with new works every year, and we have to keep up with the trends. We have to be informed. Again, go do the research, because change is going to happen, and you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of that, because then some of the students start catching on and they get turned off by that. You want to be open to the changes that are happening, because it welcomes the students that you're teaching into the conversation more. Learning never stops. Someone told me, borrow and steal from everyone. My vision statement is to be a lifelong learner. And I want to always be learning, and to be learning from those people that, have experience in other areas that I don't. Education is such an area where you can borrow their teaching strategies and implement it in your room. Again, it's the practice of teaching. And so you have to practice and try ideas out on students and see what works for them. The next one, be collegial. Be the person that you wish you had. Helping others is very gratifying. I'll tell you, there are times whenever we go to like a marching band contest, and it feels like it is, it's like, all of the armies arriving on the field of battle. Just because we're in like quote unquote competition, I always try to view that more as a competition with ourselves. And I never try to view it as a reflection of like I'm in competition with that person that is, a teacher across the way. Be collegial and, always be helping each other out. I've talked about this a little bit. Research other programs, but not just to find out what they're doing, but, to be specific about it. Like look at their itineraries whenever they travel for a contest, or whenever they figure out what they're doing for their concert series. Look at how they're structuring that. Programs. Look at what they're programming on their music. See how they're able to achieve that really hard work that stands out to you that maybe you got to play in college. But look at the other pieces that they're using to complement that. Programming is such an important part of being a music educator whenever you're having to craft programs for people to listen to. And you have to think about like what are they doing to be able to achieve those great works, because you'll see that there's some lesser known works that are maybe the works that their kids are more enjoy playing. Look at the way that they structured their ensembles. Do they have all of their winds in the same class? Do they split them up, brass, percussion, and then woodwinds? Or do they have them split up by experience level? So you have to research the other programs, but then you also have to know how to make it your own. Don't just do something a certain way because it works for someone else. You have to figure out what works well for you, for your leadership style, and for the students that you lead. Someone told me years ago, we know a lot of what. The student teaching begins the how, and then after 5 to 10 years of experience, you have the what and the how. But the master teachers are also the ones that know the when and the why. And that really hit me. It's one of those moments where you think that you know, but you have no idea. And master teachers know what to do and how to do it, but they also know when to do it and why they're doing it. So as we're learning and we're growing and we're being collegial, we have to really think about when is it the right time to do what we're doing. Record. It is so important to record your ensembles. You have 2 ears, and you will only be able to take in so much information at a time. And so you have to listen back to recordings, because there are some things that are going to stick out to you that you would have heard if you weren't so focused on, did the section that I was working on get better, or did little so-and-so play that part accurately. And so recording gives your ears multiple opportunities to listen back. And it also gives your eyes some opportunities to see some of your tics. Recording myself conducting was one of the most humbling experiences I've ever had. Recording myself playing an instrument also highlighted a lot of weird things that I did. Facial expressions or maybe additional movement that was unnecessary. So recording is great for you and for the students. And honestly, when they see you recording, they'll start recording themselves. Concepts versus content. Don't just teach the piece. Teach the concepts to play the pieces. This was something that was so foundational for me, because there were times whenever I just learned how to play that solo. And then the same technique, even the same chord structure popped up in a new piece. And I had to go back to the drawing board and relearn how to do the things I already knew how to do. I tell my students all the time, it's copy paste, copy what is in your fundamental packet and paste it into the piece that you're working on. We should never be working to teach the students by rote for only one piece. We have to get them to understand the concept that we're teaching and not just the content that we're working on. We often worry about the absence of error rather than making music. Someone told this to me and I told them, now we're preaching. The absence of error, this idea of perfection or musical perfection is so prevalent, I think, in our profession. And a lot of times, for me, and I'm preaching to me, okay, this might be you, I don't know, but for me, I was my own worst critic. I could have played something and to the average listener, they would have thought it was the best thing they'd ever heard, their best interpretation of the piece, whatever. And for me, I couldn't stop thinking about those 2 or 3 errors that really stood out to me that I wanted back. And so when we worry about the absence of error, it frames it for our students as well to think about the absence of error. And while they need to be working toward not making errors, the whole point of this thing is music education. And we have to teach our students how to make music, and that will allow them and free them up from the fear of making mistakes and inspire them to work hard to eliminate the errors and mistakes that they're making. Speaking of mistakes, make mistakes, just don't repeat them. It's important that we have the freedom to make a mistake. However, whenever we allow ourselves to continually fall into the same traps, then we're no longer improving. And this is one area where, as a teacher, we can lose our credibility very fast. If we make a mistake on the podium, we have to, one, admit it and not just stop and comment on something that caught your attention. We have to say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm going to work and practice so I don't make that mistake again. And then you have to hold yourself accountable to that. But don't repeat the mistakes that you make. But don't be afraid of making a mistake. The next one is ask questions. I cannot count how many times I ask people questions all the time. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Now, do your research. Make sure that you're being informed. But don't be afraid to ask questions. Because again, we're all here to help each other. And this last one I wanted to leave with you before I jump to your words of wisdom. It says, Rome wasn't built in a day. And I'm sure all of us have heard this phrase before. But this last part of it, but they were laying bricks every hour. To think about like your program and the vision that you have and the mission that you set for it. You know, you have to remember that Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were constantly laying bricks. They were constantly about the work to build the city of Rome. And so as you're building your program, think about like what are the bricks that we're laying that is going to build us up to the program that we desire to be in our vision statement. So here's our interaction. You've been writing them in. I've been seeing them pour into our comments section. What are the words of wisdom that you have received? Add your comments to the live stream. So I'm going to kick it over to Julie and Alexis on the live stream, and then Whit's going to compile some of these words of wisdom as well. So go ahead and add them, and we'll start commenting on them. Yeah, I see Alexis put on here, make connections between warm-up fundamentals and pieces you're working on. Yeah, definitely. You got to connect those dots for the students. That goes back to the whole concept over content, you know? Teach the concepts that they need to achieve the piece that they're working on. Yeah, I see Jerry Emmons posted here, the copy and paste. It does. It gets overlooked all the time. You know, as a percussionist, I dealt a lot with percussion sections at Franklin and at Nolensville. And I'm constantly teaching them fundamental exercises. And I just focus really on the fundamentals. And then if they can play a roll at this speed, then they can play it that fast in their book. And so we have to teach them how to copy and paste from that fundamental and draw that connection exactly. Okay, I see we're still adding some comments in there, but I'm going to keep going here because we're about to run out of time. One thing that I like to do whenever I teach a session, I like to give some recommended books. And hey, what better time than all of this downtime that we have to dive into some good books? So the first one I would recommend, this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. My mentor, I student taught with him at Franklin and then got to work with him for 10 years. He's now our fine arts director in Williamson County, David Adelit. This was required reading for my student teaching experience. And it really gets to the heart of how to build relationships with people. And I believe that's so crucial for us as educators, not just for like our students and building relationships with them, but also building meaningful relationships with the parents and with our administrators, our custodial staff, and maintenance crew. So check out that book if you get the opportunity. Another one, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. It's an incredible, incredible book talking about how to be a leader. I've referenced this book a few times, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's a staple in the leadership repertoire. This book, I don't know if many people know about it. I learned about it a few years ago. It's called Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. And this book it is incredibly centered on conflict resolution and how to go into a situation. Maybe you have a parent that's angry. Maybe there's a student who's angry or who is maybe wanting to quit your ensemble. Maybe you've screwed up and you've done something wrong and your administrator is upset. This helps you understand how to have that crucial conversation and how to see things from other people's point of view. The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. This was such an eye-opening book for me, and it just talks about the multiple habits that we have. For example, whenever we brush our teeth, we usually brush our teeth the same way. And it's because we've developed that habit. And I think this carries over to the way that we teach our students to play their instruments or to perform music. We build those habits of performance that really help us free our mind for making music and not just focused on playing the right rhythms. Another one is called The Talent Code. This really opened my eyes. It's by Daniel Coyle. It opened my eyes to the way that the mind works, and the way that we process information and the way that we build our skills. So definitely check it out. And then I mentioned this one earlier, The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. This book really changed my life. And I think that it is so important as educators and teachers for us to also be very aware of our money and being responsible with it. We're going to bounce back to that interaction in a moment, but I wanted to hit our outline because I know we're at our time. We talked about the 5 steps of effective leadership, which are research, reduce the content down so that it's accessible to your students, clarify it so that everyone's going in the same direction and aimed at the same target, practice, and then monitor and make sure that the results you're getting are the results that you want. Implement your vision think about where do you want to be, how are you going to get there. Then we also talked about procedures and goals and rehearsal structure and questioning. And we also talked about being informed, being involved, and being professional. The references I used, here's that Schmoker book, Leading with Focus. And then I have some thank yous to Dr. Julie Hill and her team at UT Martin for welcoming me to be a part of this, what once was the Corona Connection and is now Keeping the Beat, hosted by TMEA. For Alexis, Eutysis Derryberry, and TMEA for allowing me to present in the opening session of our online learning. To Tiffany Kearns and the CMA Foundation for being a sponsor of this. To Innovative Percussion, Pearl Drums, and Adams Percussion, they've been there every step of the way in my career, and I'm so thankful for them. And then if you have any questions or feedback on this presentation, I'm always here. Again, my name is Michael Holland. My email address, mhollandpercussion@mac.com. If you have any questions or feedback that you need some help with, I'm here, and I can, if I don't know, I'll try to point you in the right direction. Whit's going to scan back through these comments, and we're going to see if there are any other words of wisdom that we want to shout out, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so some of the words of wisdom that your colleagues are sharing are always be completely transparent, letting people know that you don't know everything and that you're a learner as well. And then another one that really stood out was, above all else, do no harm. So if something you can apply to students in music, and they said, Chelsea on here said, it was to students starting medical school, but you can apply it to your music students, but be encouraging and welcoming, and you're going to lead them down the right path, following that advice. Kathleen Walsh-Reiser says, my fault. She says it a lot on the podium. I like that. Yeah, and so a lot of it is just being encouraging, being positive. Susan Wilson on the YouTube page said, these words of wisdom are so true, not just for new teachers, but, for kind of veteran, seasoned teachers, and that these younger teachers can bring energy and new ideas as well. So, it's not just the new teachers learning from more seasoned teachers, but it goes both ways. So,
absolutely. I learn new things from people all the time. I was honored to get to go and teach the UT Martin honor percussion ensemble, and something Julie Hill said, she's like, I'm learning from you, and I was blown away by that, because there's so much that I can learn from her. But it was so cool to see someone in such a high position also say, like, I'm still learning as well, and to admit that, and to be so open to that process, I think that's part of the missing ingredient that we have at times, where, for me personally, ego can get in the way, and we have to be very careful about not allowing our ego to be in the way of our own learning, or to be in the way of our students' learning. I'm so thankful for all of you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope it's helpful for you. Hopefully you can glean something from this. I'll go back through these comments and try to answer some of them and reply to you. Or if you shoot me an email, I'm here. And hey, we've got nothing but time. So feel free to reach out. I would love to get to know you and to answer any questions you may have. Thank you all for tuning in.